Good evening, everybody. This is Seth Engelborg, Chair of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. We are meeting for our June 5th meeting of the Conservation Commission in a hybrid format with some commissioners and audience members physically present in the Public Safety Facility Room and some on Zoom. The first thing we'll do here is go over or establish a roll call of members. So members, when you hear your name, please respond in the affirmative. We'll start with Mike Mizzarelli.
Here.
RJ Turcotte.
Here.
Tim Brain.
Here.
John Schaefer.
Here.
And Seth Engelborg's here. Linda Williams.
Here.
How are you today?
Hired.
All right, so the next thing we need to do is discuss our continuances for tonight. Under public hearing, notice of intent, section B, we have Nantucket Islands Land Bank, Smooth Hummocks Way, SC 483893, continued till June 26. Under notice of intent, section C, we have Sconset Beach Preservation Fund, 59 through 83 Baxter Road, SC 483759, continued till June 26. We also have the Summer House of Nantucket Realty Trust, 10 and 16 Ocean Avenue, SC 483824, continued till June 26. And we have West Assured LLC at 62 Winoma Way, SC 483869, continued till June 26. And I believe that's all. With those continuances, members, is there a motion to accept the agenda?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John. We need to do a roll call vote. So Mike Mizzarelli,
Aye.
RJ Turcotte,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, aye. That carries unanimously. Thank you all. We'll move on to public comment for items not on today's agenda. If you have a comment physically present in the room, come up to one of the mics and introduce yourself for the record, or on Zoom, raise your hand. We'll be using the Select Board's protocols for public comment, limiting comment to 3 minutes or less and not engaging in substantive discussion. Does anybody physically present in the room have a public comment they wish to make? Does anyone on Zoom have a public comment they wish to make? Seeing none, we'll move on to our public hearing. We'll begin under notices of intent. And we'll be starting in our section B, which is no waiver required. Just as a reminder, we don't hear these all unless commissioners or members of the public would like them to be heard. So we have 2 on this section today. We have the 16 Wall Street and 2 East Lincoln Avenue, SC 483906. Would any commissioners like to discuss that? Would any members of the public like to discuss that? Okay, and we have Town of Nantucket and Nantucket Pond Coalition, Hummock Pond. Would any members like to discuss that? Would any members of the public like to discuss that? Seeing not, is there a, yes, go ahead.
Just a quick note on that one. We don't have a DEP number yet, so we can't close it. They were going to open it just in case you all wanted to discuss tonight.
Thank you, Will. So, Town of Nantucket and Nantucket Pond Coalition at Hummock Pond will continue till June 26th. Is there a motion to approve or to close the hearing for the notice of intent on East Lincoln Ave Realty Trust, new SC 483906?
So moved.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Tim and Linda, for the second. By roll call vote, Mike Mizzarelli,
Aye.
RJ Turcotte,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, aye. That carries unanimously. We'll now move on to notice of intent waiver required, section D. And these we will hear individually. We'll begin with Act 2 LLC, 14 Plover Lane, SC 483905, represented by Brian Madden. Brian, good evening.
Good evening. Brian Madden from LEC Environmental Consultants representing the applicant. So this is the coalition of bringing forward the restoration plantings into a notice of intent. I think everyone's fully aware of all the details. We presented the restoration plan at several other meetings, and it's within the packet. All the plantings have been installed, and the deer fencing is mostly installed at this point. Irrigation is set up. So, I believe the real intent of the this notice to be included within the order of conditions is to memorialize the monitoring obligations and the survivorship of the expectations for the plantings. We had submitted a monitoring schedule along with an invasive species management plan that again is intended to be adaptive and reactive to site conditions. There's already been initial management of invasive species within the ground cover relative to removal of garlic, mustard, and Japanese honeysuckle within the ground cover. And, the site's going to be continued to be monitored through the next 3 growing season. But everything's looking good at this stage. And I know we've talked about this one a lot, so I'll keep it short and sweet for now, and certainly able to answer any questions. And I appreciate the commission's time and feedback.
Thank you, Brian. Commissioners, any questions or comments? All right, my turn, I guess. So I don't have any issues with what's presented in the narrative or the plans for the notice of intent, but just a reminder to commissioners, this would also be a time to think about any additional conditions that are needed to satisfy appropriate adherence to the performance standards for this project, in addition to all the monitoring and survivorship that Brian discussed. This could include any of our standard lighting conditions. It could include the include the requirement to have a conservation restriction put on the site. And it can really include whatever we think we need to ensure that this restoration project is successful. So we don't necessarily need to discuss it in the open session unless it's something that you think is pertinent for getting feedback from the applicants. We'll have another opportunity in the orders of conditions to write the conditions. But if there is anything that you think needs to be discussed or you have questions about, now is your chance.
I just have one.
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Is this NOI encompassing also the encroachments on the neighboring properties, or is it just on 14 Plover?
The NOI was filed specific to 14 Plover. However, the enforcement order and what has been voted on to date is inclusive of the encroachments onto the neighboring parcels for 16 and 12 Plover. And, the plans have all been consistent, showing the plantings on the adjacent properties to account for the encroachment.
Thank you, Brian. And
Thank
there
you.
will be a separate item on our agenda tonight under enforcement actions that if there's anything specific to that, we can discuss there. Anyone else? At this time, we'll move on to members of the public. Does anyone physically present in the room wish to make a comment? If not, we'll go to Zoom. So I see Glenn Wood. We'll bring him over, please. And anyone else wishing to comment, please raise your hand in the Zoom. Glenn, good evening. Please introduce yourself for the record with your name, connection to the project, and then make your comment.
You were unmuted for a second there. Oh, there you are.
Hi,
There we
everyone.
go.
Glenn Wood. Just as a supplement to that, Seth, I was in contact with Dan Bailey about this specific issue as to whether he wanted to have his clients part of the NOI. He did not, and he suggested himself that the work on his two clients' properties, which is, already now occurred in full, could be done under the EO. So that's how we've handled it at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're all in agreement there. Anyone else wish to speak from the public? If not, Will, do we have everything we need to close this order?
Yes, we do, Seth.
Brian, would you like to close?
Yes, if I could just make one final comment, though.
Sure.
For the commission's consideration and deliberation of the conditions. So I think we mentioned this at part of the enforcement hearings, but to include it within this notice of intent hearing, if the commission is interested in conditioning a restriction onto the property, the applicant is amenable to a deed restriction similar to what is occurring on neighboring parcels for no development and protection of the open space areas. This area cumulatively is, on the order of a half acre. So not something typically you see with a conservation restriction, but certainly amenable to a deed restriction. But if you take that under advisement.
Thank you. I do believe we have conservation restrictions on Nantucket that are around that size. There are several that are obviously much larger, but there are plenty that are that size. But that's up for our commissioners to discuss. But at this point, if you'd like to close, then we would need a motion to close.
So moved.
Thank you, Linda.
Mr.
We need a
Chairman.
second.
Second.
Thank you, Mike. By roll call vote, Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
RJ Turcott,
Aye.
Tim Brain,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, aye. That carries unanimously. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you all.
And now we'll move on to Nantucket Islands Land Bank, 70, 72, 74 Washington Street, SC 48 3907, represented by Liz Phelps. Liz, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Liz Phelps, representing Nantucket Islands Land Bank on this application to prune groundsel tree on our property identified as 70, 72, and 74 Washington Street. These are three adjoining naturalized parcels abutting a town-owned parcel that provide public access to the harbor on Washington Street. Resource areas on the site include the coastal beach abutting the harbor, which transitions to coastal dune that is generally defined by the edge of the beach grass. And just a little background, there were previously two dwellings on this property that were moved off, and the site was restored with American beach grass. That beach grass was supplemented naturally with some native species, including the small cluster of groundsel. We are requesting permission to prune the small cluster of groundsel tree to keep control of the vegetation and maintain public and pedestrian access to the site. We do need to request waivers for this work because it's in the coastal dune and within 25 feet of the coastal beach. We're requesting waivers under the premise that there will be no adverse impact to the resource areas, and it will provide a public benefit by maintaining public access and harbor views along the Washington Street corridor. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Liz. Commissioners, questions or comments? All right. So I know I'm going to be that one guy today, but so I looked at this project proposal, and it might seem relatively minor, just requesting to prune some native shrubs. But then I looked at, what the impact of that was, and what the resource area is, and what the stated reason for this project is. And to me, this project doesn't make any sense. There are 5, if I counted correctly, public access pedestrian accesses onto Washington Street beaches. I looked at the application, and then I looked at the pictures, and the groundsel trees that we're talking about are honestly very small. Then I drove past the site to make sure that I wasn't just, overthinking this. And the shrubs there, I'm not going to call them trees, the shrubs there are very small. So I'm all for responsible pruning of vegetation, but here's what, the impact is. You're taking those shrubs that are holding that dune in place and doing what I would say is unnecessary work, causing impacts to the vegetation and potentially the wildlife using that vegetation for no real point, if you ask me. I mean, I know I'm just this one person making this comment that probably nobody expected, but in the narrative, it says, what's going to happen is these grounds are going to grow up and they're going to block everything and shade everything out. You're talking about a due north facing spot right on the harbor where wind and salt spray are blasting through there. I'm pretty sure that those forces are going to keep these baccharis or these groundsel low growing anyways. And right now, they're a few feet tall. I see one of the alternatives in there was mentioned to just wait and see. I think that's certainly the appropriate thing to do here in this case. Just wait and see. And if these do develop into the 12, 15-foot shrubs that we see elsewhere, then prune them then. But right now, it seems like counter to the interests of the Wetland Protection Act, frankly, counter to the interests of the land bank. If you ask me, I don't work there, but from outside perspective, that's how I see it. And I don't see what the point of the project is right now. I'm not trying to be emotional about this, but it just seems like the wait and see is a better alternative here. So for the record, I'll recognize that at 5:18 p.m., Commissioner Plandowski joined the meeting, and I'll go to Commissioner Williams, who has their hand raised.
I drive by there all the time. I drove by there today and I had actually the same feeling that you have. So I do agree with you. Premature, not necessary, for all the reasons that you stated. So I'm on the same page as you are.
Thank you, Linda. Any other commissioners? Yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't disagree with what you or Linda are saying. I have a slightly different opinion about groundsel in general, that when they go to seed, I think they're becoming invasive, and it's a tough call. I get it, from holding the dune and wildlife, and but I can see the argument of removal for not spreading sake in 5 years, and then it's just a bigger project. So I'll just wait to see if there's any other comments from commissioners on that as well.
Thank you, Mike. And just to clarify, this project is for pruning, not for removal. Removal is an alternative that was discussed in the notice. If this project came in for removal, I would be even more animated than I am right now. I hear your point, Mike. I personally, this is getting off topic here, but I personally love the flowering period of groundsel. It's a beautiful reminder that we still have life in the fall, but fair enough about the seed spreading. So other commissioners, go ahead.
Just a question
Yeah,
for
Tim,
Mike,
go
for
ahead.
you. Would pruning them prevent them from seeds, spreading seeds?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there might be less seeds, but depending on the time of year they're pruning, they're going to grow back up and, go to flower as well.
Other commissioners? RJ?
Thank you. Hot tonight, Seth. So, woody vegetation is going to hold the line better. And I mean, we've seen the land bank and the town elsewhere presenting on, there's some interesting possibilities for this site in general. And I wouldn't be opposed to just letting the groundsel be there, considering that they're planning, public access, bike paths, raising the place. They're doing all sorts of planning there in the future. And it's not it'll do better holding that dune than beach grass will. And it's not doing any interference right now. And I too would be shocked if it got to 15 feet tall, but I hadn't really thought about it till now.
Thank you. Yeah, we do need to be careful not to judge this application on what is possible for the future, but solely on what is presented. But I do agree with Commissioner Turcott that, especially in our new regulations, adding the protected interest of resiliency, that area is subject to significant coastal flooding, sea level rise, and things that the applicant's organization is actively working to mitigate and adapt for. And I think it just makes sense to have as much natural barriers to erosion and sea level rise and flooding in place until such time as some project is proposed there that a significant change is needed. And I know this seems possibly like even aggressive when we're talking about just trimming some shrubs, but in the scope of what we're protecting, having robust, mature shrubs in that location is actually a benefit for the wetland resource areas. So even if those groundsels did become 12 feet, for our interests, that would be a good thing. I mean, I guess you do have to balance the wetland scenic views, but there's so many other views from different angles of that property that it would be a hard point. And then with the public access, yes, that's a protected interest there, but immediately adjacent to the site is a completely bare sand beach that you can walk right onto. So I think that it is in our interest to retain mature vegetation at the site. Other commissioners? Okay, we'll go to members of the public at this point. Anyone physically present in the room wish to speak? Anyone on Zoom wish to speak? If so, please raise your hand. I don't see anybody. So Liz, what would you like to do at this point?
So I understand your point, Seth, and everyone else, and certainly makes sense. I just wanted to clarify that, we aren't looking to prune, the shrubs any smaller than they are now. We were just looking at, future maintenance and not letting that groundsel get out of control to the point that it starts encroaching along the roadway and, basically, causing a public or pedestrian access issue. But I certainly understand the point. It sounds like maybe I'd like to continue this just to discuss with others and see if there's, if we want to try to present some other information to the next hearing.
Thank you, Liz. I appreciate you looking into that. Would you like to continue till June 26th?
Yes, please.
This will continue till June 26th. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to amended orders of condition. Well, we have none of those. So we'll move on to our public meeting. And we'll begin under orders of conditions. We'll start with East Lincoln Ave Realty Trust, 16 Wall Street and 2 East Lincoln Avenue, SE 483906. We'll send some of these out and we'll get it on the screen.
I'm also just quickly finishing up a waiver for 14 Plover, but it's basically done. What is happening?
Linda, you need to mute.
That's not me.
Okay.
Hang on.
Nothing happening here.
How do we sound? All right, we're going with that. I didn't do anything, but it sounds normal now. So 16 Wall Street and 2 East Lincoln.
Can you share it to the Zoom too?
All right. 16 Wall Street and 2 East Lincoln. The order permits the proposed removal of an existing dwelling, construction of a new dwelling, and landscaping within land subject to coastal storm flowage. No waiver, no NHESP. We had condition 18 and 19, our lighting condition, our native species, no cultivar planting condition, no ag chemicals or FERT, and no waiver.
Commissioners, any questions, comments, or additions? If not, is there a motion to approve and issue as drafted?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you, Linda and Mike for the second. By roll call vote, Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
Archie Turcott,
Aye.
Joe Planowski,
Aye.
Tim Braden,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelberg, aye. That carries unanimously. And we'll move on to Act 2 LLC 14 Plover Lane, which is SC 483905.
I'm adding like 3 words real quick, but.
When you're ready, if you could share that to the screen and to the Zoom.
All right, 14 Plover. We're gonna have to change this. So this order permits the proposed restoration work, the restoration work required as a result of an enforcement order at 14 Plover Lane within bordering vegetated wetland and its buffer zones. A waiver is required for this project as proposed. Non-NHESP, we have 18, 19 lighting. Plantings and seedings, native species, no cultivars. FERT and ag chemicals, shall, whoa. I thought there wasn't a no in there, and I thought it was saying they shall be applied. So we're good. 23, monitoring site evaluations will be conducted during and at the end of the first, second, and third growing seasons. I believe I pulled this right out of the report, which, because of condition 18, is sort of redundant, but I think the monitoring should be in there anyway. Monitoring reports will be submitted at the end of growing seasons and/or prior to December 31st of that year. The reports will include an assessment of the overall status of the restoration area and planting areas and recommendations. For example, management or replacement plant material per survivorship rates established within the OOC. The report will also document the presence of any invasive species present and implemented or recommended management methods. Waivers under our bylaw and regs. Waivers are required for this project 39018B, all projects must maintain a 25-foot undisturbed buffer to a vegetated wetland. The commission finds that this project as proposed will result in a net benefit to the resource area to be restored pursuant to an enforcement action. Therefore, the commission grants a waiver under 393H3C of the Nantucket Wetland Protection Regs.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions, comments, or additions? Can you scroll back up? Yep. Yes, go ahead, yeah.
Are they really not going to need fertilizer at any point for any of these
That
plantings?
there already is in the potted plants from the nursery.
Yeah, I would guess that the ground is pretty rich over there, and it's been grown in the nursery. I don't see a need for it at this point, but it could be evaluated at another time.
Okay. So I got a bunch of conditions I want, but anyone else has anything before we go?
I knew this was a starting point, don't worry.
So the first, some of these are standard things, honestly. The first is any invasive species removed shall be disposed of accordingly at the Nantucket landfill.
I have them all pre-written.
I think we need a condition that says any irrigation proposed or any irrigation applied on this site is temporary and shall not be maintained beyond the effective date of this order of conditions. And then, once you get those in, we can talk more.
One of the things I didn't put in here, like our project area showing less than a certain percentage of regrowth, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, we need the survivorship conditions.
They
all of that
were,
fun stuff.
why isn't it auto numbering? They were in the notice.
Yeah, but it's important to call them out anyway.
All right. So I'm adding,
Temporary.
these are
irrigation.
before the ones you even just said, but I'll get them all. But I'm adding right now, should the project area show less than 50% regrowth of native species within the first 2 years and 6 months, which we can change this time or whatever, of the permit, the applicant shall file a new notice or amendment for supplementing the area with native plantings and or seedings. All reports are required annually until a COC is issued. That way it's not just these 3 years. And then
You can just say all irrigation is temporary and must be removed. Is issued or the permit, the OOC expires. And then proper removal of invasives.
Am I allowed to call it the Nantucket landfill?
Yes,
At the Nantucket,
that's just a name.
in that little dumpster out front.
No, they're gonna be bringing their stuff through the scale.
Yeah. Straight up to the digester.
The sign on that dumpster was designed by me, though. Me and Vince.
It's a good sign. I know.
Okay, and
Something
now,
else I had.
are you good?
Yep.
Now we need to have a discussion about any security that we would like to consider, if any, including bonds, other financial instruments, deed restrictions, and or conservation restrictions. So I'll open the floor to anybody who wants to discuss those. Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I was going to ask about if this was the time we were going to discuss Pierce Atwood's letter. I remember earlier hearings, there was some discussion, particularly on the bond, because we're talking about the letter that's in the packet, or at least I am at this moment. But there was some, well, I don't even know how to term it, but possibly it wasn't even going to be possible to get a bond. Like, who's going to sign up for that? So I'm not sure where to go with that, quite frankly. But the deed restriction certainly would be of interest for further discussion.
Thank you. Yeah, there are other financial measures, like holding money in escrow as well. If people felt that was a necessary thing, there's ways to get around that. I do agree with the letter that it might be hard to get a bond, but we have plenty of alternatives available to us. But I'm not sure if that's necessary or not, but it is an option. So, Joe, go ahead.
What did we do in the Sconset situation? This is the same issue, basically.
I'm going to stop you there. It's not a good practice to look back into the past about what happened on other orders. We need to base this decision on the site itself and the notice and the order that we have in front of us. Other commissioners?
A question.
Yes.
So can somebody explain the difference between, practically, between a deed restriction and a conservation?
Sure. I'm sure Linda or RJ could explain it better than me, but in essence, there are some big differences. One is that a deed restriction is temporary if it's not renewed. So it's my understanding actually on the site, the deed restriction that the applicants are proposing to accept, historically it did exist on the property, but then it expired. They're usually 30 years. Conservation restrictions are permanent. Deed restrictions generally don't need someone else to hold them, although sometimes there are things with HOAs or other organizations where that would happen. Conservation restrictions can't be held by the owner, has to be held by a different entity. A deed restriction too is a lot harder to enforce upon. You can enforce upon it like via the courts, basically. Conservation restrictions can be enforced upon directly by the owner of that restriction. So at a minimum, that conservation restriction would need to be, not the owner, the holder. At a minimum, that conservation restriction would need to be inspected for compliance with the restriction at least once per year. And if it was out of compliance, it would trigger enforcement. So Commissioner Williams or Turcotte, would you like to add anything to that? Linda, we'll start with you.
I agree with Mike on the deed restriction. Deed restrictions, private deed restrictions have a termination period of 30 years. Unless the enforcement, as it is with the planning board, is given over to the Concom, then it can be done in perpetuity because the Concom has the ability to enforce the deed restriction. So I think that deed restriction part of this needs to be fleshed out as to how we want to make this in this decision.
Thank you. Commissioner Turcotte?
Thank you. So the reason that I was so interested in a conservation restriction was because it is an independent party and it does go in perpetuity. We're putting all this time and work into figuring out how to fix this. We don't really completely and never will completely understand every single thing that got cut out of there and was lost, but a CR would require a good record, written and photographic, and GIS, GPS points of that site, everything that's there. It would include the NOI, it would include the whole record. Someone would inspect it every year. That's an independent party, and make sure that that does what we want it to do. I mean, I didn't know that the deed restriction could be transferred to us, but I don't know that the Conservation Commission wants that responsibility. It would just be a form of permanent insurance, and it is a small site. Usually you do it on larger sites with more habitat value, but it's not unheard of to do it on a smaller site. So that's why I was so interested in having it done. It's just permanent insurance that this gets done right and gets finished.
Yeah, hold on one second. If I just may add too, it's important to think about I know we need to be focused on the site, but when considering something like a conservation restriction, what the value of that site is in terms of the landscape diversity and connectivity. So, that might just be a half acre, but it's connected to a huge amount of acreage held in conservation in the surrounding parcels. So making sure that that property is in permanent conservation aids in all the wetland interests that we protect, wildlife, water quality, all these things. And I know there's been some narrative from the applicants saying that it's unnecessary because of the location of it being primarily located within the resource area and a very minimal amount within the buffer zone, and the claims that can't ever be developed no matter what. No, regulations change. Not that I think that we're going to do a drastic overhaul of the regulations and allow building in wetlands, but conservation restrictions are much more ironclad than regulations. It has to be written up, and then the holder has to approve it, and then the select board has to approve it, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has to approve it. There's a lot of eyes looking at this, making sure that that property is permanently held in conservation purpose. And by holding that property in conservation purpose, we're automatically ensuring for the future that all of our protected interests are protected. You can't ever reduce the probability of another violation or incidents to zero, but it gets recorded to the deed, it gets published. Everyone's going to know that no matter who it is, whether it's the current owner of that property or any prospective future owner, is going to 100% know that that exists and to not do anything in that area. So do we have to go that far? Possibly not. But if we do go that far, it's going to ensure the maximum protection for that resource area. So Tim, go ahead.
Sorry for all these. It's really about how this procedure works. So who supervises this and looks after the annual inspections? Is it assigned to a conservation group or something? How does that work? And is there a cost involved?
So it's a little bit odd in that most conservation restrictions don't arise from this type of process where essentially someone's being compelled to make that restriction. Most of them are landowners working with the entity that already wants to accept that restriction, and they have a relationship. There's organizations on Nantucket, nonprofit organizations that hold restrictions, and they've worked with owners to negotiate those restrictions. I looked this up. Conservation commissions can hold conservation restrictions. Does the Nantucket Conservation Commission want to hold one or not? That's a different question. But I think that's even a question for later. We don't necessarily need to decide the specifics of it now. In order, we can just say that this is something that is needed before any number of triggers, let's say before a certificate of compliance is issued or before X, Y, and Z is issued. And then it's up to the permit holder to figure out all the logistics of that. Just like when we put any other condition in place, we put the condition in place to protect the resource areas, and whoever holds that permit interprets and deals with the conditions in the way that they see fit.
That's helpful, thanks.
Yeah, John, go ahead.
Yeah, I think from my point of view, we need to be mindful of, the anger that was at the beginning of this and, what happened and then now what's happening now. And it seems to me they've done everything they've said they were going to do. And so we just have to be careful not to be arbitrary or punitive. I mean, I know we want to send a message to people, you can't do this, but I don't know, you read that letter that we got. He said, we can't be arbitrary and capricious about what we do. So I think it just needs to be balanced.
Thank you. I certainly have 100% certainty that doing this would not be arbitrary and capricious because it's specifically an option called out to us by our bylaw. And, there's a reason. There is resource areas, there's protected interests, and there's performance standards, and there's a specific reason for doing that. If we would just say, oh, we need them to do it because we don't like their behavior, that's a problem. But that's not what we're doing here.
Okay, that's what I'm saying.
So I'm going to go to Linda, and then I'm going to go to Will after that. Yeah, so Linda, Will, and then Mike.
I'm still harking back to who holds it, because who holds it makes a difference as to whether it's enforceable in, RJ mentioned it, in perpetuity, or it's only enforceable for 30 years and the holder would have to re-up it after 30 years. So I still think some entity with the town should hold it.
Thank you.
So it can be in perpetuity as opposed to a private entity holding it and having to re-up it themselves after 30 years, or it expires. I mean, Arthur Reed could probably, and Glenn could probably speak to that issue.
Yeah, thank you, Linda. Will, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we also have the option of doing this as a part of our enforcement order. If anybody, I'm pretty sure that I didn't make that up, but if anybody's having reservations and wants to talk about it, then we will also have counsel present. But I don't necessarily see an issue with anything that you guys are talking about right now. I just wanted to throw that out there that I think we can also do it as part of the EO.
So I think can is probably a word that you can use, but if you look at the bylaw and how this is actually laid out, it would make much more sense to have it as part of an order of conditions. The other option that we have available to us, though, is that we don't have to issue this order of conditions tonight. We have 21 days to issue this, so if people want to think about this more or to try to have town staff look into it or what have you, we can always do that. I'm just gonna reference the part of Nantucket's bylaw that is important here. It's chapter 136, wetlands, section 9, security. The commission may require as a permit condition that the performance and observance of other conditions be secured by one or both of the following methods: by a bond or deposit of money or negotiable securities in any amount determined by the commission to be sufficient and payable to the town of Nantucket. The bond shall be released by the commission only after the commission issues a certificate of compliance. That's section A. Or B, by a conservation restriction, easement, or other covenant running with the land, executed and properly recorded, or registered in the case of registered land. So it makes sense to me to do it as an order of conditions, permit condition, but that's my opinion. With that being said, does any other commissioners wish to weigh in? Yes, oh, yeah, Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a lot of good points on the conservation restriction versus the deed restriction. However, I think I'm more in favor of the deed restriction because, and I know it was discussed, but it's primarily in the resource area anyways. And I just think the deed restriction, it doesn't have as much teeth as the conservation restriction. I fully agree with that, but I see the deed restriction personally as enough.
Thank you, Mike. And just so we're clear, that would be allowed. Any other covenant would include deed restrictions. Linda, is your hand still raised?
No, after what Mike said, I had to rethink this, but I think we should take some time, and what we should do is ask town council his opinion on exactly which way to go, because I'm uncomfortable doing something that expires after 30 years. It's not enforceable by the town in some entity.
Seems wise. I think leaning towards not issuing this tonight for sure. Will, go ahead.
We may be able to ask George shortly, since he's here. But the other thing I was going to say is that I definitely think it's wise. I just wanted to say, so we all know, we'd have to make sure that everything's buttoned up and we can issue it at the next meeting, because our next meeting is 3 weeks, so it's the 21-day clock. That's not a big deal. I'm just saying it out loud.
Yeah, I mean,
What's a big deal if you mess it up?
thank you for referencing that. I mean, we can keep that in mind. We can always issue, or we can always hold a special meeting simply to issue that order if we need.
We'll be good.
You know, we have plenty of possibilities. Especially with the possibility of having completely remote meetings still, we can meet for this one thing if we really need to. But I think we're all set.
We'd have to sign it that day at that meeting.
Yeah, we know, and we would do that. Yes, John, go ahead.
Is everybody aware that this property's under agreement to be sold?
I don't think that's relevant information for
Well,
this.
it could be if they don't
We
maintain.
actually can't talk about that.
Yeah, we shouldn't talk about that. So any orders of conditions or other deed restrictions that are recorded run with the title of the property. Doesn't matter who owns the property. It matters what orders are on that property.
Okay.
This could be owned by the Queen of England, or the King of England, I guess I should say at this point.
Yeah.
And it would still be enforceable. Okay, so other commissioners at this point. All right, we are in a public meeting. I see members of the public's hand raised, or multiple members of the public's hands raised. I am not going to recognize them at this point. And
We do have Glenn. I don't know if.
Mr. Wood, if you have a comment that is strictly procedural, I will allow it. If it veers into anything else, I will ask you to stop.
No, Mr. Chairman, it's totally on point. Thank you. First off, Mr. Attorney Bailey's completely wrong. His letter's incorrect. The property is not under agreement. Secondly, we think a DR is sufficient in conjunction with baking in a special condition to the OOC that expressly states that this condition runs with the property in perpetuity, and that by filing with the Registry of Deed, any property owner down the road, if there was such a transfer in 5 or 27 years or 50 years, they'd be on record for it. And then thirdly, relative to a CR, I've never seen and I've never done a CR on such a tiny amount of property. If the commission ultimately feels that a CR is necessary, we would object to anyone but the Conservation Commission doing it, simply because we have no relationship with any nonprofits, and we think that it should be done in-house. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. Figure it out. Yeah, I think that if we were to go that route, we wouldn't assign a specific holder. We would leave it up to the permit holder to decide. So at this point, anything else from commissioners? Okay, let's hold this to our next meeting at June 26th. Before we move on, commissioners, if you have any questions, comments, additions, anything about this project, you need to contact Town of Nantucket Natural Resources Department staff before the meeting. We do not have an opportunity to hold this over again past 6:26. If we need to be here all night on the 26th to get it right, we'll be here all night, but we would like to avoid that. So make sure any questions or whatever you have is discussed with Will and Jeff prior to that. And that being said, we will move on. I think that's all of the orders that we have before us tonight. We do not have any requests for determination of applicability. We'll move on to minor modifications. We have two. The first is Yellow Dog Nominee Trust at 224 Pulpus Road, SC 48 3858, represented by Brian Madden. Brian, go ahead.
Thank you very much. This was an order of conditions issued December 2024 for proposed additions to a single-family dwelling, driveway reconfiguration, construction of a garage studio and outdoor space within buffer zone to BVW and IVW. The minor mod request essentially is some updates to the garage studio, including some roof overhangs that were added. That were approved by HTC. The front or the northeasterly side of the garage dwelling, there's a roof overhang that extends minimally by 1.7 square feet into the 50-foot buffer zone, but that's cantilevered. And based on past practice, that does not require a waiver. There are no structural supports touching the ground in the 50. So we'd asked for the modification approval as proposed.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Seems like it's okay.
I know we've had this discussion about cantilevered structures in the 50-foot buffer many times. We've gone back and forth about how to deal with them. I'm not sure that the assessment that no waiver is required is correct or not. There was a while where we were saying, yes, waivers are required, but we'll grant them because there's no adverse impact, no reasonable alternative, or really it is a reasonable alternative. And there might have been some projects where we said no waivers are required. So this is one of the things that early on in my time in the commission, I was voicing to make some clear policy on. And then we ended up just changing the buffer zone, so it became less relevant. But commissioners, it is up to you to decide if a waiver is required for this project or not. And if so, then we'll need to decide how to proceed. So commissioners, thoughts, questions, or comments? RJ?
So I'd prefer to try to keep the things black and white. We can keep black and white. And a foot and a half here, it's the no build. I'd prefer to just keep it out and just keep it clear to the public that the no build's the no build. We start to get into a lot of material debate over overhanging structures and whether they're going to change how things happen on the property and how things then go descend down into the resource area. This is a good example of creep that we are trying to avoid. And, we set these buffer zones, and I personally think we should just keep it clear and hold the line. That's all.
Thank you. I mean, I have spoken on, I think, this both ways before. I've said we don't regulate the air, we regulate the wetlands. But if you look at a plan view of a map and that structure is within the 50-foot buffer, Um, it is within the no build zone, so it's hard to rectify those two perspectives. But we do need to come to a policy, and before we come to that policy, we do need to make a decision tonight. So other commissioners, how do you feel? Mike, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I take RJ's point, but I personally don't have a problem with it because it's cantilevered and not touching the ground. This is going to be, as each of these applications gets to a certificate of compliance, it's going to be pretty clear we're going to be at the 75-foot line. So I don't see the need for the waiver personally.
Okay, anyone else? Or if not, Linda, go ahead.
My hand's up.
Yes,
I agree with
go ahead.
Mike.
All
I
right,
agree with Mike.
If anyone else does not want to weigh in on this issue, then we could simply take a motion to approve the minor modification. Is there
So
a
moved,
motion
Mr.
to that
Chairman.
effect?
Second.
Thank you, Linda and Mike, for the second. By roll call vote, Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
RJ Turcott,
Nay.
Joe Plandowski. Tim Brand,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Seth Engelborg will abstain. That carries with 5 in the affirmative, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention. So thank you, Brian. Sorry. It's because I don't know how to feel about this, but
Well, we have gone back and forth on this one issue a couple of
this
times.
is what abstentions are for, when you can't make a decision.
Yeah.
And we'll move on to Once Upon a Tide LLC, 56R Matacasham Valley Road, SC 483661, represented by David Haynes. David, good evening.
I love
Good
these
evening.
names. I love these names. I got to tell you, I love these names.
Well,
Thanks.
I made a mistake on the original filing and put down Once Upon a Time, and it didn't get caught until Arthur Reed had picked it up, and when he was going to record it, we had to correct it. So yeah, that's a good one. This is a request for a minor mod for a deck. It has been built, I want to say already. Was built on the end of the house. There's already a previous minor mod for granite pavers closer to the coastal bank out there, but all farther than the deck is about 95 feet from the top of the bank, and it's in line with the existing house. And there's a pool and a fire pit and a patio seaward of all of this. It was built over an existing lawn and landscaped area. Is very minor in nature, and again, it does not require a waiver. But so it's just a minor intrusion into the 100-foot buffer zone.
Thank you. Commissioners, questions, comments? If not, is there a motion to issue the minor modification?
So moved.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Linda. By roll call vote, Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
RJ Turcott,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Tim Brand,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Seth Ingberg, aye. That carries unanimously. Thank you, David.
Cool fire pit.
And we'll move on to certificates of compliance. We'll start at that same property, Once Upon a Tide LLC, 56R Matacasham Valley Road, SC 483661, also represented by David Haynes.
Yes, this project has been completed in accordance with the approved plans with the minor modification that you just issued. The site is stable, all landscaping has been completed, all grass is grown. The pool is in. The house is being renovated on the inside, but all work on the outside is complete.
Thank you. Commissioners, any questions or comments?
Nope.
Will, have you been out to the site and you have a recommendation for us?
Yes, sir. I was there yesterday. I'm recommending issuing the cert. We do have continuing conditions for the lighting and pool. The fire pit is really cool.
Can you tell us some numbers of those, please?
So we have 20 through 24. 20 is our, given the topography of the site, pool draining shall be pumped into a truck. No chemical treatments between November 1st and May 1st, so that's 20 and 21. 22 is all chemical treatments shall stop 3 weeks prior to any draining or discharging. 23, the applicant shall provide contact information for the pool company. And then 24 is exterior lighting to be in compliance with Chapter 102.
Thank you, Will. Commissioners, would anybody like to make a motion to approve and issue the certificate of compliance with ongoing conditions 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24?
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Second.
Thank you, Linda and Mike for the second. By roll call vote, Mike Mazzarelli,
Aye.
RJ Turcott,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski,
Aye.
Tim Brand,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelberg, aye. That carries unanimously. Thank you, David.
Thank you all very much. Have a
We'll
good
move
evening.
on in our agenda. We have no extension requests tonight, so we'll head straight to other business. We have no minutes to approve. We have no monitoring reports. And we'll head to committee reports. Tim, do you have a crack update for us?
No.
Okay, John, CPC.
And nothing new.
Mike, do you have NP and EDC?
Nothing new.
Linda, for Harbor Plan?
Wow, we're the only person that has anything new. We have started looking at the final draft. That's going to be let out to the public. We're going to have a public session on the 16th of July, whatever that Wednesday, I went Thursday, Wednesday. I think it's Thursday. We had to move it. But we're having a public session, a forum at the police station, middle of July, and we're planning on having a final version of this our next meeting.
Thank you. Commissioners' comments. Any commissioners' comments tonight? All right, I got a couple. The first is that the Nantucket Coastal Conference is next week, next Tuesday on June 10th.
Took my comment.
It might be sold out, but if you haven't signed up already, highly recommend going. I'll be there. Full day conference
What's-
about all things coastal and coastal resiliency, climate change, and wetlands resources will definitely be highlighted.
When
May
is
be
it?
able to- It's June 10th, Tuesday, June 10th. It's a full day conference at the Great Harbor Yacht Club. You might be able to sneak in on the wait list or see if any tickets opened up.
I can probably help with that.
Okay.
I think
Yeah,
Leah
and I
would
got
be
I got
happy.
inside people.
Okay, ask Will to help out.
I'm the connect.
Yeah, and I got inside people too.
Do you have something to say on that, RJ?
Not like mine.
I'll be there as well. And if you guys plan on going, should we announce that? Do we have to announce that if we're all going to be there?
We do not have to post it as a meeting as long as nobody deliberates about anything. So don't sit next to each other. Don't sit next to each other and don't talk about anything if more than 4 of us are going to be in attendance.
I'll be watching.
In other words, ignore each other.
Yes. All right. Anything else on that one? All right. So the other is related to the orders of SC 483736 and NAN 142. You may have seen that 3736 was subject to 2 appeals that are pending before the Mass DEP. There's going to be a scheduled site visit for those appeals that will send out to commissioners. And you may have seen that NAN 142 was subject to 2 appeals locally to the Nantucket Superior Court. And if people, I don't know if the Energy Office has received the official summons on those yet, but the initial reports are available on the Mass Court's website that you can look at if you want to read those. And at this point, we won't really be discussing those projects anymore, really at all, until appeals both on the DEP side and the Superior Court side have gone through the process.
How long was that typically take?
It can take a while. Every process is different, but it definitely can take a while. So, yeah, those are my comments tonight. No, if we don't have any other comments, we'll go to enforcement actions. Will, before we head to Plover Lane, do we have any new and emerging enforcement actions that we need to discuss?
Not as of this second.
That is good. So we have one listed on our agenda tonight, which is 14 Plover Lane. And Will, do you have an update for us as to where we'd like to begin on this?
Yeah, real quick, I believe June 5th, as in today. I think we set it as the meeting date. We wanted to have the existing fencing down and the lighting existing in compliance with Chapter 102. I did receive an email from Brian. I didn't make it into the packet, but I forwarded it to Seth so that he got to see the letter from the electrician, but the lighting is all shut off until they can install compliant lighting, but I guess the wiring is no longer connected. That's the simple stuff that we asked for in the EO. But I think we're going to discuss potential monetary fines or similar word to fine.
Yeah, before we get to there, we are in receipt of letters from the violator's representative, Mr. Madden, indicating what Will said, that compliant lighting is scheduled to be installed hopefully in July, but at this point, the lighting that existed there has been disconnected, so I think that's technically compliant by default. If it's not connected, then it doesn't make any light. But we'll let the lighting enforcement officer have the final say. But they're moving forward on that process at least. So I think, for me at least, they've satisfied that condition. We would request a update with photos when the actual lighting is installed. And then we are in receipt of information as well saying that the temporary or the fencing that was put up without benefit of a permit has been removed, and that most of the temporary fencing that was allowed through the enforcement order has been installed. But Mr. Madden, I'll let you elaborate on either of those points.
Yeah, thank you. For the record, Brian Madden from LEC. Yeah, so the section of the pre-existing fence that had been installed with the benefit of a permit had been removed. There's been additional efforts for the temporary deer fencing that was approved at the May 22nd meeting that has been installed. It is continuing to be further expanded as we spelled out at that May meeting and as approved. I can certainly submit photographs to confirm as much once that's all completed.
Thank you, Brian. Commissioners, any questions or comments on that? Okay. Any questions or comments on anything else before we move to the discussion of fines or continue discussions of fines? Okay. Attorney Pucci, Town Council, is here with us today. Commissioners, you should be in receipt of a letter from his office. Is everyone in receipt of that? George, good evening and welcome. If you could just introduce yourself and give the overview of that letter, we would appreciate that.
Yes, sure. Good evening, Mr. Chair and members of the board. This is George Pucci from KP Law. I gave you a very short description of a potential option that you could employ to deal with the issue of whether you want to call it fines or monetary penalties, civil penalties. The basic concept is you want to impose a monetary penalty for the violation of the Wetlands Protection Act, which was the subject of your enforcement order and the revisions to the enforcement order. Under the circumstances where you had the violation occur, it doesn't appear that you want to impose. From what I've heard so far, it doesn't appear that you want to impose something that would exceed $25,000. So I just reiterated to the commission, because I saw that it was actually in your boilerplate enforcement order, the quoted language from the Wetlands Protection Act already, that someone in violation of the Wetlands Protection Act is subject to a civil penalty up to $25,000. I looked into it a little further because, frankly, I haven't seen this employed ever before on one of the commissions that I represent. But there's a very clear appeals court case from 2017 that addressed the issue and held very clearly that a commission does have jurisdiction and authority to exercise the right to impose a civil penalty under the Wetlands Protection Act. The appeals court in that case did not go ahead and affirm any specific amount that had been ordered, but reversed the lower court, the Superior Court, on that issue and sent it back to the Superior Court to, basically have the commission go forward with the ability to go forward with that fine and resolve that issue at the lower court level. I happen to know that case was subsequently resolved by way of an agreement, so it never ended up with a further Superior Court ruling on it. But again, it's very clear from the Massachusetts Appeals Court that a commission such as your commission has the right to exercise the ability to impose a civil penalty up to $25,000. I think in this context, you could issue it by way of a new enforcement order, a revision to the enforcement order, a demand letter. I would prefer it to be in some type of administrative process, so then it would sort of put the onus on the property owner to appeal that from you if they chose to do it and didn't seek to resolve the issue with you short of any type of litigation. So I essentially said that there's no guidance that I could find about what the reasonableness of a fine under that provision would be. I think you need to, exercise discretion and reasonable decision-making on it and not act in an arbitrary and capricious manner. And it's not for me to say whether the commission wants to vote, to impose a monetary penalty, but in my opinion, it's totally within your discretionary authority to do that. I think that if the commission wants to go ahead with that, you'd have to have a discussion about what you think would be a reasonable penalty under the circumstances.
Thank you, Attorney.
One thing I wanted to note, Mr. Chair, I got a communication from counsel, and I hope it's okay for me to say this. I don't think it was expressed to me confidentially, but in case it was expressed to me confidentially, counsel had represented to me that the property owner was willing to pay a fine and up to a certain amount. And I'm kind of late to this proceeding, so I don't know if that had ever been communicated to you, but apparently there was a figure they were willing to pay, to offer, I believe, to resolve that issue beyond the increased filing fee that they paid for the after the fact filing. So I don't know if the commission was aware of that.
Thank you. As far as I can tell, I'm not in receipt of that specific number. I took your point in the letter about taking into account the filing fees as well, but if you're in receipt of that and it was not delivered confidentially, I would say provide that to the commission.
Yeah.
And then it's a point for discussion, though. We don't have to stick to that number if we don't think that's the right number, but it's certainly helpful for a discussion.
Yeah, definitely. It's something for you to know about. I mean, Glenn is on the call, I believe. If he tells me it's okay to review that number, I'm happy to express it to you in addition to forwarding his letter.
Okay. Attorney Wood, would you like to weigh in on this topic specifically?
Yes, what I emailed to George was specifically that our client is prepared to agree to the $11,100 figure that the commission has already come up with, uh, you know, based on the enforcement order as issued. This is a number that's been discussed previously, maybe even a couple months ago, and that date is from the issuance and the enforcement order to when LEC submitted the remediation plan. So our client is prepared to do that and agree to that fine. I also agree with George that I've never seen in 40 years of practice a commission ever fining under the Wetlands Protection Act. And given that you didn't do it in DiMartino, I would see it to be grossly arbitrary and capricious. Thank you.
Thank you, Glenn. So, George, at this point, do you have any additional comments, or are we ready to
No, not to get into a back and forth with Glenn. I'm almost as old as Glenn now. I don't know if it's 45 years or whatever you just said, but I can tell you, both as your counsel and an officer of the court, I reviewed a 2017 decision of the Massachusetts Appeals Court, and there is absolutely no question that you have the ability to impose a civil penalty under the Wetlands Protection Act, under the provision that I quoted. So Glenn may have never seen it done, but you have the ability to do it. That's my legal opinion, and it's based on a appeals court decision that was never overruled. So I don't think that it's any question. That I think the only question would be is what amount the commission would be satisfied with.
Thank you, George. I'm not a lawyer, but I reviewed Attorney Pucci's letter and that case law that he is referencing, and I agree with him in full force that we have that availability for us, and it would be legally justified to do. So I'm going to go to Will, then I'll go to commissioners.
Not to keep beating a dead horse, and I'm about to sound like you, but we're not held or bound by any prior decisions, and the commission had a different makeup at that time, and it was a different situation. Just to add on to that.
Okay. I think proceeding in the way that, well, should we seek to impose a monetary penalty? I think proceeding in the way that Attorney Pucci is referencing with the civil penalty under Wetlands Protection Act makes much more sense than the non-criminal disposition that was originally discussed at this commission. And I'll leave it up to commissioners at this point to answer 3 questions. The first question is, would you like to proceed with this penalty at all? Would you like to proceed under the civil penalty procedure that town council has laid out? And what amount would you like to proceed? Would you like to proceed with that $11,000 amount or a different amount? And we can just go down the line. If you have a comment, make it. If you don't have a comment, we'll just pass you. Mike, any comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I'm in favor of the penalty. Civil penalty would be acceptable to me, and the amount. I'm going with the amount, or my reasoning is from the date of enforcement to remediation. So we had the discussion of what that number would be based on Mr. Wood's comments, but that's not my reasoning. My reasoning is we have to put a penalty forward, and we also want to make an example that if people cooperate with the commission, we can be reasonable. So that's just where it comes down for me on the amount, from date of enforcement to when we saw the remediation plan.
Thank you, Mike. RJ, any comment?
Yeah, I agree with Mike. The amount was based on the $300 a day, which is how we got the 11,000. But the idea was, per our last discussion, that that penalty would be less if you act quickly to remedy it, and they come to the first available meeting, and that's what the total came to. So I think that's fair.
Thank you. I would like to proceed with the civil penalty as laid out by town council. I would like to proceed with the amount that's being referenced by other commissioners, in addition to the reasons that they're discussing, to add in the scientific side, which has been discussed before. I think that number is, or the number, or the amount of value lost to that resource area from a resource economics perspective is far in excess of $11,000. Granted, some of that value of that ecosystem services was regained by the restoration, but it can never be regained fully because you can't simply cut down a bunch of mature, robust vegetation and then put in new horticultural plantings and on day one, it be okay. 30 years from now, or 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, that resource area will likely function in a similar but not equivalent way to how it functioned in December of 2024. So for all these reasons, I say we should proceed. Joe?
For a cooperating violator, I don't support a fine. Here's what happens with the fine. The money, whatever we want to assess the violator, goes into the town accounts, municipal accounts. It doesn't do a thing to help fix the environment that was damaged. I would just as soon sit down with the violator and say, hey, wait a minute, we need 6 more trees or 6 more shrubs or whatever, rather than have the money, having a check that we turn over to the town that's being used for God knows what.
Thank you, Joe. Attorney Pucci, can you weigh in on this point? Should the civil penalty move forward and that penalty be assessed, where would monies from that penalty go?
Yeah, I've never really thought about that issue. It's something to think about. I have seen fines before, agreed fines, and they went into the Conservation Commission.
Yeah, can it be
Funding.
directed towards the Conservation Commission's,
Yeah.
programs?
Yes.
I read the Massachusetts enforcement
Yeah.
bulletin, and it says that the monies go into a municipal fund in the town. It doesn't go to do anything else other than to support whatever expenses come into the town.
Yeah.
Yeah, with respect, Joe, I'll direct our town council, who's much more well-versed in legal affairs, to look into this for us and to update us in the future. But Tim, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm in favor of a penalty, and I think the amount that we settled on, the 11,000, is fair, and I think it's, the calculation of it was right, because it was the amount of time it took them to say, here's how we're going to fix it, so.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, I have a fourth question. If we don't do it now, will we have the ability to do it later? Or is this kind of now or never?
I believe as long as the enforcement order is open, it could be amended at any time.
So we could do this at another time if we
Yeah, we could do
couldn't
that
come to
next
an agreement?
meeting or in
Okay.
July or whatever, but
Okay.
seems like we have our town council here with
Yeah, no,
before us.
I
We
just
have
wondered.
a recommendation from him, but yeah, if we're not ready to do this and we need to do this in June 26th or July, whatever, as long as that EO remains open, it can be amended as many times as
Okay,
necessary.
well then I'm in favor of what we've been talking about. The violators in agreement, it seems like everything's going the right direction, so I'm good with that.
I wanted to interject too, Mr. Chair, on that.
Yes, go ahead.
With that comment made about the funding, it's sounding to me, you haven't called for a vote or anything, and I haven't heard from Linda yet, but it's sounding like the members are the ones that want to impose the fine are satisfied with the $11,100. So knowing that, you could craft something appropriate to put right in the order of conditions. If Glenn is representing that they're not going to contest that amount, then we can, craft that condition accordingly in that order that you're about to issue. And that
Thank
would be
you.
a way of possibly resolving that about where the, money goes. Applicant agrees to pay the sum of such and such, to be used for a certain purpose or something along those lines might be a creative solution to it if you're agreed on the amount.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll go to Linda in a second, but we do already have 5 people or 5 commissioners who wish to issue this civil penalty. And we'll defer to your legal opinion if there's a way to ensure that penalty goes back to the Conservation Commission's
It doesn't.
operations, then we would definitely want to do that. So Commissioner Williams, go ahead.
First off, having done this at the HDC for a house that was taken down right behind the Jared Coffin house, that money that we assessed them went right into the general fund, which is basically what Joe is saying. It goes into the general fund, not the Conservation Commission. If it's the same as the other ones that I've been dealing with at the planning board as well as the HDC. That's one. 2, how much was the 10 times the fee that he already paid?
It was
$2,000.
$2,000.
2,000 even?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I agree with the civil penalty and not the criminal disposition. I am on the fence. I know there's more of you that are in favor of the 11,100, but I understand Joe's position on this because they are working with us. But if the applicant offered that amount as sort of a settlement amount, I'm okay with that. But I feel like Joe does as well, but I will go along with the majority.
Okay. But it's pretty clear on this what the majority is. It seems like most members wish to issue this civil penalty. Yeah, go ahead, for the $11,100. Is that the correct amount? As a town council has laid out. Will, do you have a question?
Yeah, through you, and I think this question's for George. Was I understanding, because I just want to know what all our options are here, but was I understanding that right? Were you talking about the NOI that we heard tonight for the restoration planting, and that it would be possible to condition that in a way that's specific so that the money actually stays with the Conservation Commission, like in our fund? Or is that not possible?
I think that's separate. I'll let George speak, but yeah, go ahead, Attorney.
Well,
Pucci.
that was what I was referring. I wouldn't have suggested that if it weren't for the fact that, on Glenn's representation, that amount is acceptable to them, that they would accept that. And so knowing that, I would want to look at if we can word it in a way that you could put in a condition in your order of conditions that it doesn't go in the general fund. Because there's no reason for me to give the opinion that it wouldn't go into the general fund.
Right.
I'm just wondering if we can come up with some language about, what the purpose of that civil penalty is. There may not be a solution to it, but I think it would make sense to at least look into it and see if that's a viable option. And then I can just give Will some, proposed language for the condition that you would include in the order of conditions, knowing based on Glenn's representation that they're not going to challenge that.
Okay, thank you. I'm a bit more confused now, but I'll say why. So at the beginning of your discussion, you laid out the options before us, which would be to amend the current enforcement order, write a new enforcement order, or some type of demand letter. Those to me all seem squarely within the enforcement order process. I understand that we also have a notice of intent for this project that we closed, and now the order of conditions is open for deliberation on that notice. But it seems like to me that we should handle the enforcement, and I know that notice was also required because of the enforcement, but it seems like to me we should handle any type of monetary penalty that's related to the enforcement under the enforcement order, but.
Yeah, no, I
there.
think you're right,
Yeah.
and that definitely is my recommendation until I heard tonight that we, that there's an actual agreement on the sum. And, for the sake of efficiency and exploring if you can try to put some control over what happens to that money, it might be something to look at about thinking about putting in the order of conditions. So that I didn't mean to confuse it, because I definitely had recommended it along the lines that you're saying, is to just amend the enforcement order and do it that way, specific to the civil penalty provision of the Wetlands Protection Act. But, I'm always open to looking at creative solutions if we can achieve even more of what you're after.
Okay. Commissioners, yeah, I'll go to you for comments, and then I think I have a way to move forward here. So Linda, I saw you first, then I'll go to Joe.
I don't believe we can add it to the order of conditions because I believe we closed that, did we not?
We closed the notice of intent. The order of conditions remains open for deliberation.
I'd rather do it on the enforcement order.
Thank you. Joe, go ahead.
From the enforcement manual, it's very clearly states fines cannot be imposed in an enforcement order. The Conservation Commission can impose fines under the Wetlands Protection Act only by going to court and getting a final judgment from a judge.
So
I do not agree with that.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either. And I think we need to be careful about the words we're using. A civil penalty and a fine, as far as I understand it, are two different things. Is that correct, George?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And
So
in
it might
fact,
be
right.
That language actually might technically be true if we're talking about fines only, but if we're talking about civil penalties, which is how we are trying to now go about this, dealing with this monetary penalty, I think it's much more broad than what's in that document.
And I know that that's in the enforcement manual. I do not agree with that you have to sue to impose a civil penalty. I do not agree with that.
Thank you. I mean, also commissioners are always, as always, are welcome to hold their own opinions and beliefs, but our town council is telling us that we have resources here, so I would say we should trust him. Mike, we'll go to you.
Can I just add one thing?
After Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Half of a comment, but I guess more of a question. So we have the majority is in agreement. The majority of the commission is in agreement with what we want to do here. The question of whether it goes to the general fund or directly to the commission. What am I trying to say here? Sorry. I would like to deal with it basically tonight if possible, or do we still have the option later? George, are you saying that we're going to do some investigative work, but we're essentially agreeing on it tonight, or do we have to delay this to the June 26th meeting? That's what I'm trying to find out.
I'll let George speak in 1 second, but before, I mean, we could take a vote to agree on the method of civil penalty and the amount, and then to have town council investigate it further too. But yeah, George, go ahead.
Yeah, and I apologize. I usually answer questions through you, Mr. Chair, and I agree with that. You could vote the concept tonight and then have me look into the best way that I think it could be crafted. And obviously, I'm happy to speak to Glenn Wood about it as well. And if we can come up with the best way of imposing that $11,100, whether it be a combination of in the enforcement order, in the order of conditions, if we know it's not going to be appealed, whatever that may be. So if you're agreed on the amount and that you do want to assess it, I think the process would benefit from us looking into it a little bit further to see if we can come up with the best creative way of imposing it to, get the greatest bang for your buck,
Thank
so
you.
to speak.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Joe.
I was going to just say that the reference I'm using is the enforcement document, and it's section 8-5.
Thank you. Glenn, would you like to make a comment at this time?
Just quickly, not even going to go on screen. Happy to work with George on this. When I sat on my Concom for many terms, we had a system to have it be directed to the Concom, but I think it has to go to town meeting, as I vaguely recall. But I think that if it was specifically directed to, say, maybe not the Concom, but to some other organization that does good work, that might be an option to consider. But I agree with George. I'm sure there's a workaround here. Because
Thank you,
Joe's
Glenn.
correct that I hate this kind of money going just into the general fund and used to do, pothole repair.
Right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Although on Nantucket, we do need quite a bit of pothole repair, but I think that's not the point of this penalty. I think that we should tonight vote on the method and the amount, and we should direct town council to look at the mechanism for how to get it to come to either the Conservation Commission or to be used for other conservation purpose on the island of Nantucket. Will, go ahead.
I didn't get to this earlier when I asked the question about the order, but the important thing to keep in mind there is obviously we'd have to be settled on whatever language if we were to use the order, which it sounds like people are less interested. But the way it sounds to me is like there might be, depending on how important it is to everybody where that money goes, we might have more control over it in the order only because the other party seems to be kind of willing to play ball with that. But
Yeah.
we'd have to know that night and we'd have to have it ironed out before the 26th. So
Yeah, and I'm not even sure, even if we put it in there, that it would be enforceable. I think it's much better to have it dealt with as an enforcement issue, have town council look at the mechanism for this. If it's something that, it needs to go to town meeting and we can bring the article to town meeting, fine. I mean, it ultimately, it might not be possible. You guys are right. It might just go to the general fund, but we have the resources, and we're paying our attorney to look into this for us, so let's let them do their job. So, at this point,
I'll make a motion
would you like to make a motion
to amend.
to,
Go me go
actually,
ahead.
before you do that,
Okay.
I do have a question for town council. George, you mentioned that there's an opportunity to either amend the existing enforcement order, write a new enforcement order, or do a letter. Which of those do you think is preferable, or it doesn't really matter?
Yeah, the enforcement order issue would definitely be preferable to a demand letter. But I am, in light of, establishing tonight that the applicant is, accepting of that figure as a penalty, I think I'm looking at the cleanest way of doing it is to just craft appropriate language for the order of conditions. Because it's clear they're not going to appeal the order of conditions. And if they've agreed to that amount, that appears under the circumstances to be the cleanest way of doing it, accomplishing what you're trying to accomplish. If it ends up that it has to go to the general fund, it has to go to the general fund. But I'm just telling you from experience with other commissions, I had one that they cut down a much larger area than this, and there was a monetary amount that maybe people weren't thinking about where the money went, about it, that they weren't as astute as you are about thinking about the general fund. But I know that there have been circumstances where these types of penalties have not gone to the general fund. I just want to look into it a little bit and see if I can give you that type of alternative, in which case you'd probably put it in the order of conditions. No reason not to.
Okay.
So
I still think we should amend the current enforcement order we have to talk about that penalty and that amount, and then we could add it in the order of conditions too. But I think we need to amend this enforcement order to make sure it happens. So,
Take a crack at it.
would you like to make a motion to amend the enforcement order for 14 Plover Lane to assess a civil penalty under the Wetlands Protection Act in the amount of $11,100.00, and to have town council investigate methods or mechanisms for which that could be used for conservation purpose?
You did it for me, but so moved, yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, John and Mike, for the second. By roll call vote. Mike Mizzarelli,
Aye.
Archie Turcott,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, that's me, Joe Plandowski,
For a cooperative violator, the answer is no.
okay, Tim Brain,
Aye.
John Schaefer,
Aye.
Linda Williams,
Aye.
Seth Engelborg, aye. That carries 6 in the affirmative with 1 opposed. Glenn, do you have a comment related to this that you'd like to make?
Yes, I think your motion needs to be revised. It's not under the act, it's under the bylaw because it's a $300 day. You said under the act. I think that's incorrect, and I think you need to revise your motion.
Yeah, I don't agree with that. You're not doing it. You're doing it as a monetary penalty, a civil penalty under the Wetlands Protection Act. The only issue that the $300 a day has relevance on is, or at least from what I've heard from you tonight, is it's giving a rationale for where you came up with that figure. It helps, obviously, that the applicant is saying that they'll agree to that amount, but if you thought about it, again, trying to be reasonable and not arbitrary and capricious, you looked at it in the sense of, if you took $300 a day, which is the typical non-criminal disposition, and you counted it by the amount of time that you took for us to find out about the violation, and they came in a cooperative manner, that's how we calculated the sum. That provides a reasonable basis for how you came up with a civil penalty under the Wetlands Protection Act, in my opinion. So I don't recommend that you amend that motion.
Thank you, George. To ask more plainly, do you think that the motion that was made, seconded, and voted on in the affirmative is a reasonable motion to proceed?
Yes.
Okay. Commissioners, unless anybody feels differently, I'd like to move on from this at this point. Okay, anything else pending before 14 Plover Lane apart from monetary action? Attorney Pucci, thank you very much for your time with us today, and we will keep posted for a letter about ways that this could go to conservation purposes and also ways that it could maybe be incorporated into the order of conditions.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you as well.
And I'm waiting to do anything until we talk, George.
Yes, correct. Thank you, Will. I will work on your other stuff, but on this particular one.
Of course.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good night.
Yeah, you too.
So we'll move on at this point to staff reports.
All right. Seth took my fun one about Tuesday, the Coastal Resiliency Conference. Did I even get the name right?
Coastal Conference.
Coastal Conference. There's a lot going on at NRD all the time. The rest of it, this is just some quick clerical appointment situations, and I'm going to send this around too. But June 23rd will be our Baxter Road DEP onsite. That'll be at 1 p.m. If you want to ride, I would say meet at the trailer at 12:30. I'll recommend people just go out there, but if you want to ride, you can definitely get one because I know I'm going to be going, but I'm picking up Whitney from DEP at the boat, but Jeff and Vince will be going too, so there will at least be a few seats.
Yeah, on that, I mentioned this in the email earlier today, but we could do it as a site visit, but I think we should post this one.
We're gonna.
Okay,
Yep.
Yeah.
thank you.
Where are we meeting and when we're out there?
Hang
Baxter
on.
Road, long
He's-
road.
he's
Let me
gonna-
finish.
He's gonna say,
So I already said half of it. If you would like a ride, meet at 131 Pleasant at 12:30 promptly. And if not, Baxter Road at the sand delivery point. Carpooling would be good, but it'll be fine. If not, we'll figure it out. But 1 p.m., that'll start right at 1. Our DEP person, Whitney, she'll be on a schedule. She's got to make a boat at 3 or 3:30. So please be on time.
What
Day
number
after
Baxter
that,
Road is that, Will?
the Baxter Road sand delivery drop point, 87,
89 or 87.
89 or
That's what I
87. You
thought.
know where it is.
Yeah, I know where it is. I just want to make sure I get the right address.
And then the next day, we have a scheduled site visit. So this is June 24th. We have a scheduled site visit at 62 Winoma Way. That's on our normal scheduled site visit day. I'm going to try to bring you guys on that, but it might be Jeff or Morgan. We'll see. My Tuesdays are getting weird, so we may have to revisit our schedule, but that's another problem. And then June 26th, I just want to remind everybody we don't have a meeting in 2 weeks. It is Juneteenth, so we have a 3-week break till the next meeting. That is it.
Yeah, just a couple of other
All I got.
things while we're talking about dates. So commissioner appointments are on June 25th. You guys probably know this by now, but only the incumbents of this commission applied. So the commission will remain the same in July. And then our first meeting in July, which I think is July 10th,
Yeah.
we will need to do officer elections and committee appointments. It might turn out to be that everyone wants to just stay at the same place they are now, which is totally fine. But if
That's my motion right now.
you can't make that now.
Not yet.
But if anybody wants to do a different committee or wants to do something else, that will be the time to discuss it then. All right. Will, anything else?
I believe that is it. I do have, I dug up all the old nameplates. 4 of you have them. 2 of them are on printer paper. But of the 4 that already existed, 2 were on printer paper. I was working on relabeling the last 3 again with printer paper about 14 minutes before this meeting, and I decided to come over here instead. So maybe
nice
for next
placard.
meeting, I might have real ones for you, because I am gonna go get the 2 that are on paper printed for real, and then 3 new guys, get you plaques as well. You never know, that could take, it's Nantucket, that might be a same day thing, that might be a 3-month thing, but
And the
you'll
town
have
has a
placards.
sign fabricator in-house, so it should be a
He
5-minute.
doesn't make those.
Yeah, not that kind of
He does
sign.
not make those. Thank you. I know
I
him.
used to make street signs, I can tell you, it's not the same.
No.
All right, great.
That's it.
Do we have physical signature pages before us tonight?
We do not tonight. I'll get them sent out tomorrow, but potentially Monday. But keep an eye out for signature pages.
Or too many of them.
Not many at all.
How many? All right, is that it?
That's it from me.
With that being said, commissioners, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn,
moved.
Mr.
Thank you,
Chairman.
Mike, and we'll take
Second.
Linda for a second by roll call vote. Mike Mizzarelli,
Aye.
Archie Turcott,
Aye.
Joe Plandowski.
Aye.
Tim Brain.
Aye.
John Schaefer.
Aye.
Linda Williams.
Aye.
Seth Engelberg, aye. That carries unanimously. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for your participation.
Remember the reappointment, guys, you have to go in and sign up again at the town clerk's office and get sworn
Yes,
in
but you
again.
have to wait until after June 25th.
After July 1.
After
do it.
July 1st, yeah, actually, or else it won't have any merit to it.
Your terms run until midnight of June 30th.
Yes.
All right. Are we?
Fun
We're done,
times.
right?